From the outside, our house was the kind of home you'd see in a catalog for comfortable living. A restored Victorian on a maple-lined street in a town that prided itself on its good schools and quiet sidewalks. My aunt, Claire, was the curator of this perfection. Her laughter was the soundtrack of family dinners, her hands always arranging sunflowers in a vase or smoothing a throw pillow. My uncle, David, was the steady foundation, a history professor whose eyes would crinkle with warmth behind his glasses when he looked at his family. And then there was my cousin, Lily, my sister in all but blood, just a year younger than me. At 17, she was a softer echo of her mother, artistic, empathetic, the one who noticed when I was faking a smile. I spent as much time there as at my own house. It was a sanctuary. My parents' marriage was a functional, chilly treaty, but Aunt Claire's home was warm. It smelled of lemon polish and cinnamon, and the rules were simple. Be kind, do your homework, and always, always tell the truth. Secrets are like spiderwebs in the corner, Claire would say, waving a dust cloth. They gather dust and poison the air. We don't have them here. The first strand of the web, though I didn't recognize it then, was the phone call. It was a rainy Tuesday in October. Lily and I were sprawled on the living room floor, supposedly studying AP Bio, but mostly dissecting the social dynamics of the school volleyball team. The landline rang, an old corded phone Claire kept for nostalgia and emergencies. She answered in the kitchen, her voice bright. Hello? Oh, hi. A pause. Her tone shifted, lowered. No, it's fine. Just the girls. Homework. Lily's pen stilled. It was a subtle change, but we were both attuned to the music of that house. Claire's laugh then was different, softer, private. I know, me too. Tomorrow? I'll try. She hung up quickly. Who was that? Lily called out, her voice casual. Oh, just Susan from the garden committee, wants to complain about the tulip bulb order again. Claire appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her smile a fraction too wide. Nothing important. I believed her. Lily said nothing, but she didn't pick up her pen again. The strands multiplied, thin and nearly invisible. Claire started a new pottery class on Wednesday nights, a creative outlet, she'd chirp, coming home with clay under her nails and a new, restless energy. David would smile, proud of her. Your mother is rediscovering herself, he'd tell Lily, utterly sincere. Then came the misplaced receipt. Lily, hunting for a missing charger in her mother's purse, found a crumpled slip from a boutique hotel in the city, dated a Wednesday last month. A single room, a bottle of champagne. Claire wasn't a champagne drinker. When Claire, her hand trembling, laid it on the kitchen island, she plucked it up without missing a beat. Oh, that! The garden committee retreat. Susan insisted we pamper ourselves. Can you imagine? I must have forgotten to expense it. She laughed, tossing it in the recycling bin. The lie was so smooth, so perfectly delivered, it seemed ludicrous to question it. Lily questioned it. She became a silent investigator. She checked credit card statements her parents left in the den. The charges were vague. Restaurant, bistro, retail, general. She noted the new perfume, a scent David never commented on. She saw the way her mother's phone was now always face down, the way she'd sometimes stare out the window, a faint, distant smile on her lips that had nothing to do with the life inside the house. The crack, when it came, was not from a dramatic confrontation. It was from a forgotten digital trail. David, technologically hapless, asked Lily to help him sync his new phone to the family cloud for photos. As she navigated the folders, she saw it. A subfolder, innocuously named Garden Ideas. Inside were not photos of tulips. There were a dozen selfies of Claire, her hair down in a way she never wore it at home, her eyes sparkling with a light Lily hadn't seen in years. She was leaning against a man whose face was cut off, but whose hand, wearing a distinctive college ring with a sapphire, was resting on her waist. The background was the headboard of a hotel room. The timestamp was a Wednesday evening in September. Lily sat frozen in her father's study, the blue light of the monitor washing her face. The happy sounds of her father humming in the kitchen, making his evening tea, filtered down the hall. The contrast was violent. She felt the catalog-perfect world she lived in delaminate, the glossy image peeling away to reveal the rotten backing. She didn't scream, she didn't cry. She did something far more devastating. She saved one of the photos to a hidden file on her own laptop. Then she closed the cloud, finished helping her father, and went upstairs. She passed her mother's open bedroom door. Claire was folding laundry, her movements serene, humming along to the same song David was humming downstairs. A perfect, terrible harmony. That night, Lily crawled into my bed at my house across town. She was shaking, but her eyes were dry and hard. What's wrong? I asked, sitting up. She showed me the photo on her phone, the proof. How long do you think? She whispered, her voice raspy. How long has she been lying to us, to Dad? I had no answer. The sanctuary was gone, exposed as a carefully maintained set. The spiderweb wasn't in the corner, it was the entire house, and Claire was the spider, spinning a beautiful, poisonous fiction that had just ensnared her daughter. The first rule of that home, we don't have secrets here, was its most foundational lie. And Lily, the truth-teller, was now choking on the dust of the one she had just discovered. The silence, she was learning, wasn't empty. It was full of the humming, terrible sound of everything falling apart. Lily did not confront her mother. The photo on her phone was not a weapon to be brandished. It was a pathogen, and she was its carrier. It changed the very chemistry of her being. I watched as my vibrant, observant cousin began to shrink, her edges hardening into a brittle shell. The warmth in her eyes when she looked at Claire curdled into a cool, analytical scrutiny. She was conducting a silent audit of her entire life. The lies were everywhere, now that she knew how to look. The book club that never discussed books, the sudden migraine that required a quiet, darkened room, a room where, Lily now noted, the faint chime of a text message would often sound. The new, unfamiliar lilt in Claire's voice when she recounted a mundane story about running into an old college friend at the grocery store. Lily began to test the integrity of the family fiction. At dinner one night, David was recounting a funny anecdote about a student. "That's hilarious, Dad," Lily said, then turned a placid gaze to her mother. "Mom, didn't you have your college reunion committee meeting tonight? How was it?" Claire's fork hesitated for a half-second above her salmon. "Oh, it was postponed. Susan's husband had the flu." She took a sip of water. "We rescheduled for next week." "That's a shame," Lily said, her voice sweet. "You seemed so excited about it. You were talking about it for days." A faint flush crept up Claire's neck. "Well, these things happen." She glanced at David, who was smiling obliviously. "There's always next week." But Lily had checked the Alumni Association website. There was no reunion committee, no listing for Susan. It was a complete fabrication. She watched her mother lie to her father's trusting face, and something in her calcified. She started collecting the lies in a notes app on her phone, a cold ledger of betrayal. October 12, claimed book club at Maggie's. Maggie's family was out of town. Car GPS, checked later, showed location at the Westin Hotel, 45 minutes away. The clinical entries were a way to manage the chaos, to prove to herself she wasn't going crazy. The truth was the only solid ground left. The worst part was David, her sweet, brilliant, clueless father. His love for Claire was his religion, and he worshipped without skepticism. Watching him beam at his wife, fetch her a sweater when she chilled, brag about her pottery, "She's making a vase that looks just like one from the Minoan era, can you believe it?" was a form of exquisite torture for Lily. She wanted to shake him, to scream the truth into his gentle, uncomprehending face. But she also wanted to protect him. He was another victim in this house of cards, and she was the only one who knew the wind was picking up. She tried in small, desperate ways to arm him. "Dad," she said one afternoon as he graded papers, "do you ever think Mom seems different lately?" He looked up, his glasses sliding down his nose. "Different how so?" "I don't know, distracted, like she's somewhere else." He smiled, a touch sadly. "She's an artist, sweetheart. They live partly in their imaginations. It's what makes her so wonderful." He went back to his papers, a man content with his explanation. The failure of that tiny probe was a defeat. She saw that the truth wouldn't just hurt him, it might destroy him. The foundation of his entire adult life, his marriage, his family, his home, was sand, and telling him would be like pointing out the tsunami while he was building a sandcastle. He would drown. Her relationship with Claire became a grotesque pantomime. They were actors in a play where Lily had read the director's secret notes but was forced to stay in character. Claire, sensing a new distance, tried to bridge it with intensified maternal affection, hugging Lily tighter, asking more probing questions about her life, buying her little gifts. Each touch felt like a violation, each question felt like espionage, each gift felt like a bribe for Lily's silence. "You've been so quiet, my love," Claire murmured one evening, stroking Lily's hair as they sat on the couch. "Is everything okay? You can tell me anything." Lily looked at the hand in her hair, the hand that had been in that photo, resting on the unknown man's back. She felt a wave of nausea so powerful she had to close her eyes. "I'm just tired, Mom. School." "Okay," Claire said, but her voice was threaded with a new anxiety. The silence she had cultivated now turned on her, becoming a wall she couldn't scale. She was losing her daughter, and she didn't know why. The poison seeped into everything. Lily's grades, which once solid, began to wobble. She snapped at me over nothing. She stopped drawing, her sketchbook gathering dust. The happy home was now a museum of artifacts from a lost civilization, and she was the sole agonized archaeologist. The climax came not with a shout, but with a quiet, brutal observation. It was parents' night at school. Claire and David, the picture of united support, moved from classroom to classroom. Lily trailed behind them, a ghost. In the chemistry lab, Mr. Jenkins was explaining Lily's potential if only she applied herself. David nodded earnestly, his arm around Claire. Claire's phone buzzed in her purse. She subtly shifted, trying to glance at it. David, feeling the movement, gave her a little squeeze and whispered, "Everything all right?" "Fine," she whispered back, a tight smile on her face. "Just Susan, garden emergency." She didn't check the phone. But Lily saw it. She saw the lie pass between them, smooth as a stone skipped across a pond. She saw her father absorb it with total faith. And in that moment, she didn't see her mother as a villain or her father as a fool. She saw them both as casualties of the silence. Claire was trapped in her own web, forced to lie to maintain the peace. David was trapped in his trust, a willing prisoner of a beautiful illusion. The damage wasn't just the affair, it was the daily corrosive drip of the cover-up. It was the way secrecy had turned her mother into a stranger and her father into a blind man. It was the way it had stolen her own voice, forcing her to become a co-conspirator in a lie that was suffocating her. The truth, no matter how ugly, was a sharp pain that could be dealt with. This silence was a chronic low-grade fever, burning away her trust, her security, her sense of reality. Walking back to the car that night, Lily walked between her parents, their hands linked behind her back. She felt like a pillar holding up a facade that was cracking behind the wallpaper. The happy home hadn't just collapsed, it had been hollowed out, and she was the only one who could hear the echo inside. The consequence of the silence was not a secret kept, but a childhood lost. And she knew with a cold certainty that she could not live inside the echo longer. The silence in the house became a living thing. It wasn't the absence of sound, the clatter of dishes, the hum of the furnace, David's lectures from his study remained. It was a quality of sound, a muffled, padded heaviness that pressed on the eardrums and made every sincere word feel false. Lily moved through it like a deep-sea diver, her movements slow, her communication reduced to gestures and monosyllables. The ledger in her notes app grew, but the entries grew shorter, bleaker. Nov 3. Dad made her favorite soup. She said she loved it. She didn't finish it. I was her only outlet. In my bedroom, with the door locked, the pressure would release in a torrent of whispered fury and desolate tears. She hugged me today and I felt like I was going to vomit, she'd say, her voice raw. He asked about our weekend plans and she said, whatever my girls want to do. And I wanted to scream, I want you to not be a liar. But I just nodded. I'm a liar too now. I'm helping her do it. The burden of being the sole knower was warping her. She started having dreams where she was shouting the truth, but no sound came out. She'd wake up with her jaw clenched, her throat sore. The photo on her phone was no longer just evidence, it was a cursed artifact, burning a hole in her pocket. She took it out one night and showed it to me again, her finger tracing the edge of the man's sapphire ring. Who is he? She whispered. Not to me, but to the universe. Does he make her happy? Is that why? There was no jealousy in the question, only a desperate clinical need to understand the cost-benefit analysis of her family's destruction. The breaking point, when it came, was triggered by something breathtakingly mundane, a family calendar. Claire, in a fit of renewed domestic zeal, a zeal Lily now recognized as guilt, had created a beautiful hand-lettered December calendar on the kitchen chalkboard. It was dotted with little illustrations, a steaming mug for family hot chocolate night, a tiny book for a library day with Dad, a knitting needle and yarn for crafting with Mom. It was a masterpiece of curated family bliss. Lily stared at it while eating her cereal. David stood beside her, beaming. Your mother's work. Isn't it wonderful? She's planned such a lovely month for us. Claire smiled, wiping her hands on a towel. It's important to be intentional about our time. Intentional. The word hung in the air. Toxic. Claire was intentional about her lies, intentional about her Wednesday nights, intentional about crafting this beautiful false front. Lily's spoon clattered into her bowl. What about Wednesday the 14th? She asked, her voice flat. The calendar square for that Wednesday was blank. Claire's smile didn't slip, but it stiffened. Oh, that's my pottery studio cleanup. It's a mess. I'll be home late. Again? Lily said. You just had a cleanup 2 weeks ago. A beat of silence. David looked between them, a faint line appearing between his brows. Lily, your mother puts a lot of work into that studio. It needs maintaining. I'm sure it does, Lily said, not taking her eyes off her mother. It must be hard to keep everything in its proper place, to make sure nothing spills over. The subtext was so thick it was practically visible in the sunlit kitchen. Claire's eyes widened a fraction. She saw, truly saw for the first time, the cold, knowing judgment in her daughter's gaze. This wasn't teenage moodiness. This was an indictment. Lily, Claire said, her voice a careful, warning melody. Let's not do this now. Do what? Lily asked. Innocence itself. I'm just asking about the calendar, about being intentional. I want to understand the system. The system is that we are a family and we support each other's interests, Claire said, her knuckles white where she gripped the counter. Even the secret ones? The words were out, quiet and lethal. David finally stirred from his confusion, his peacemaker instinct kicking in. Okay, enough. Lily, apologize to your mother. That was disrespectful. Lily turned her withering gaze on her father. The man she wanted to protect now felt like her biggest obstacle. His willful ignorance was the keystone holding up the entire rotten arch. Apologize for what? For asking a question? For wanting to know where my mother is? Is that a secret too? The kitchen descended into a frozen, silent tableau. The cheerful calendar mocked them from the wall. Claire's face had drained of color. David looked utterly lost, his foundational script failing him. Lily felt a surge of power so intense it was dizzying, followed immediately by a plunge into icy shame. She had broken the first rule. She had spoken the unspeakable, not the full truth, but its shadow. and the world hadn't ended, it had just gotten very, very cold. She pushed back from the table, the legs of her chair screeching on the floor. "Forget it," she muttered, and fled. She didn't come to my house that night. She went to the one place she knew Claire wouldn't be, her father's university library. She found him in his carrel, surrounded by books on Byzantine trade routes, a sanctuary of factual, documented history. He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and weary behind his glasses. "Lily," he said, his voice soft, "are you okay?" She sat down heavily in the chair opposite him. The weight of the unspoken was crushing her. She could not carry it alone for one more day. "Dad," she began, her voice trembling, "do you ever feel like Mom isn't telling us everything?" He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "Sweetheart, what happened this morning—" "This isn't about this morning," she hissed, leaning forward. "This is about every morning. The phone calls she takes in the other room, the meetings that get postponed, the new perfume, the distance." She was skirting the edge of the precipice, throwing him ropes of suspicion, praying he would grab one. He sighed, a long, weary exhalation. "Lily, marriage, adulthood, it's complicated. People need space. They have private thoughts. Your mother has given so much to this family. If she needs a pottery class or a garden committee or time to herself, she's earned it." He was reciting a mantra, convincing himself as much as her. "What if it's not pottery?" she whispered, the words barely audible. "What if it's a person?" David froze. The gentle, scholarly confusion on his face hardened into something else. Denial, sharp and defensive. "Don't," he said, his voice low and strange. "Don't say things like that. That's not who your mother is. That's not who we are." And there it was, the final devastating truth. It wasn't just Claire clinging to the fiction. David needed it to survive. He had built his life on the story of their perfect love. To question it was to threaten the structural integrity of his entire world. He was choosing the beautiful lie over his daughter's desperate truth. Lily looked at her father, this good, kind man, and saw that the silence had damaged him most of all. It had made him a coward. It had made him choose a comfortable fantasy over the messy, painful reality of his own child's anguish. The affair might have been Claire's sin, but the silence was a collaborative one, and in his refusal to hear, David had become complicit. She stood up, the fight gone from her, replaced by a profound, lonely grief. "Okay, Dad," she said, her voice flat. "Forget I said anything." "Lily, wait!" But she was already walking away, the echo of her footsteps swallowed by the stacks of books containing every truth except the one that mattered. The weight of the unspoken had just doubled. Now she was carrying it not just away from her father, but for him. The consequence of the silence was no longer just a broken home. It was a broken daughter, standing in the rubble, holding out the truth like a lifeline to a man who had chosen to drown. The frozen detente that followed the library encounter was worse than the fighting. David, shaken, became clumsily effusive, buying Claire flowers for no reason, overpraising her cooking. It was the behavior of a man trying to glue a vase back together from the outside, blindly smoothing over cracks he refused to see inside. Claire, in turn, dialed her performance of domestic contentment to a shrill pitch. The house became a theater of aggressive normalcy. Lily retreated into a state of numb observation. She was done testing, done probing. The ledger was closed. She simply watched the charade, a ghost in her own home. The poison of the secret had done its work. It had separated her from her parents as effectively as a physical wall. She ate meals with them, answered their questions, but she was biding time, waiting for the inevitable collapse, or her own escape to college, whichever came first. It was Claire who cracked under the strain of her own production. The guilt, the fear of Lily's knowing eyes, the weight of the double life, it curdled the performance. She began making small, unforced errors. She called David by the wrong name once, Mark, then laughed too hysterically at her own silly mistake. She forgot the storyline of her own garden committee tales, contradicting details she'd given weeks before. David, lost in his determined faith, either didn't notice or chose not to. The breaking point came on a snowy Saturday in January. David was shoveling the walk. Claire was ostensibly baking bread, the kitchen filled with the falsely comforting smell of yeast. Lily was on the couch, pretending to read, watching her mother stare blankly at a bowl of dough, her hands still. Suddenly, Claire turned, her face pale and resolved. She walked into the living room and sat heavily in the armchair across from Lily. The performance was over. The mask was off, revealing not a villain, but a terrified, exhausted woman. "We need to talk," Claire said, her voice low and gravelly. Lily put her book down slowly. She said nothing. "I know you know," Claire continued, her eyes pleading. "The distance, the questions." She twisted her wedding ring around her finger. "I can't stand it anymore. I can't stand you looking at me like I'm a stranger." Outside, the steady scrape of David's shovel against concrete provided a rhythmic, mundane soundtrack to the unraveling. "Are you going to tell me it's not true?" Lily asked, her voice hollow. Claire flinched. "No." The word was a whisper, a confession, the first true thing she'd said to her daughter in months. "It's true. There's someone else. His name is Mark. It's been a while." The admission should have been a relief. It was a confirmation, a solid piece of the terrible puzzle, but it landed like a physical blow. Hearing the words, the name, made it real in a new, awful way. "Why?" was all Lily could manage. Claire's eyes filled with tears, but they weren't the performative tears Lily knew. They were desperate, messy. "I don't know. I love your father, I do, but it's like I've been playing a part in this perfect play for so long, and I forgot who I was off stage. With Mark, I don't have to be the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the curator of this museum. I can just be me, tired, flawed, selfish." She looked at her hands covered in flour. "It's not an excuse, it's a reason, a terrible, selfish reason." Lily listened, the coldness inside her thawing into a different, more complicated pain. She saw her mother not as a monster, but as a drowning woman who'd grabbed the wrong lifeline. The perfect home hadn't been a gift for the family, it had been a cage for Claire. "Does he make you happy?" Lily asked, echoing her own late-night question to me. Claire let out a sob that was half a laugh. "For moments, then I come home and see your father's face or your face, and I feel like the most wretched person on earth. There is no happy, it's just different kinds of miserable." Then Claire did the unthinkable. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to an urgent whisper. "Please, Lily, please, don't tell your father." The request sucked all the air out of the room. The confession wasn't for absolution, it was a tactical maneuver. She was recruiting her daughter, making her a full accomplice. "He doesn't need to know," Claire pleaded, her tears falling freely now. "It would destroy him, it would destroy everything, this family, this home. We can fix this. I'll end it, I swear I will. But if you tell him, it will all be over. It will all be for nothing. We'll just have pain. Please, for the sake of our family, keep this secret with me." Lily stared at her mother. This was the ultimate betrayal. Not the affair, but this, being asked to shoulder the burden of the lie, to become the guardian of her father's ignorance, to protect the beautiful, empty shell of the family at the cost of her own integrity. Claire was offering her a deal. Carry this poison together, and we can preserve the museum. It was the same deal the silence had always offered, now made explicit. The scrape of the shovel stopped. David was stomping his boots on the porch. "Clear's coming in," Claire whispered, swiping frantically at her tears. "Please, Lily, just give me time." The back door opened, bringing a gust of cold air and David's cheerful voice. "All clear. Honey, that bread smells—" He stopped in the doorway, taking in the scene, his wife's ravaged face, his daughter's stony, pale one. "Is everything okay?" he asked, his smile fading. "Yes, everything's fine. Lily was she's worried about her college applications. We were having a little heart-to-heart." She walked over to David, touched his arm. "Just mother-daughter stuff, right, Lily?" She turned her gaze on Lily. It held a frantic, desperate command. "Play your part. Preserve the set. Protect him." David looked to Lily, his eyes seeking confirmation, trust shining through his confusion. Lily looked from her mother's pleading, guilty face to her father's open, trusting one. The weight of the secret, now spoken aloud between them, was heavier than ever. She was being asked to choose between betraying her mother's desperate plea and betraying her father's fundamental right to the truth of his own life. She took a breath. The words that came out were the worst thing she'd ever said, because they were both true and a betrayal. "Yeah, college stuff. It's stressful." David's shoulders relaxed. He believed her. He always would. He pulled Claire into a hug, kissing her flower-dusted hair. "You two, my girls, don't worry so much. It'll all work out." Lily watched him hold her mother, watched Claire bury her face in his shoulder, her body shaking with silent sobs he mistook for maternal concern. She had given her mother the time she asked for. She had preserved the peace, and in doing so, she had signed a contract in her own soul. She was now the guardian of the lie. The silence had won. The happy home was saved, and it was emptier and more horrible than if it had burned to the ground. The cost of this preservation was her own voice and the last of her childhood trust.